It's the most important. Regretfully, I'm the presenter, so it may not be the best. For you who are online, I was tempted just to do some private consulting to the 5 people in the audience that are analog in front of me, but because there are some of you out there on Zoom, I guess I'll stick to the tried and true presentation format. So equity compensation is part and parcel of what founders need to understand in terms of the expectations of co-founders and in terms of people that will join your company moving forward. And there are a couple of reasons for that. First, here's me. I've done these kind of things since 1984. I've run 4 different seed funds during the course of my life. And so I have a pretty good education. And so I do know what I'm talking about, in case you wonder. So why do you care? Well, when you started a company at T equals 0, you had to create some unit of ownership. And usually within a C corporation, which is the most frequently used form, those are going to be shares of stock. And so when you get started, you have 100% of the pie available. But how do you distribute it among the founders? And the answer may be different than what you have anticipated. Once your company is up and running, then what you're going to be doing is using stock options as a way of enticing them to join your company. You, by definition, being a startup, you're risky. You, by definition, are going to be frugal with your cash. And so salaries are highly likely to be less than market and perhaps exceedingly less than market, depending upon circumstances. And under those kind of constraints, getting someone who is an A player to join that company, the stock options play the role of the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow that it will induce somebody to join. If you're being recruited, you're going to want to know where your offer in terms of options fits within the company and fits across your peer groups. And so you need to understand what that might mean. And then on an ongoing basis, stock options are typically used for incentive compensation, so annual reviews or semi-annual. There may be a component of your compensation that will include an increase in stock options. So all 4 of those conditions are very important conditions, and all 4 of them are ones that you need to fully understand. So, founder's pie. You have to decide who does what. So you're sitting there. There's 100% of the company right there. And now you've got to figure out, if I've got a co-founders, how do we do that? Now, one common setup is there's one individual who's really driving the bus. The person who's out front, the person who's bringing the energy to it, the person who is making it all happen. And in that kind of circumstance, that individual typically get the largest lion's share of the founder's pie, and the other participants will get their shares out of the remainder, whether it's 50% or 35%. The issue is, if there is a lead individual who is making it happen, it is certainly reasonable to think that that person would get a larger chunk of the founder's pie. In other cases, there's sort of a pecking order. And it sort of is obvious too, in terms of lead, key player in the technology development or maybe production, a finance person, and a technologist or whatever. So you could have a situation where each of those people on a relative basis compared to one another, you can see the pecking order that might happen there. And here you go. This is, I haven't seen recent statistics, but it used to be said that over 50% of entrepreneurial startups do this: divide the pie equally. And the primary or a justification for that is the thought that when we talk about dividing up the founder's pie, this is fair. Problem is, it isn't. And the problem is that fair is really unfair. And what you really are doing is delaying a very important set of discussions, and you may be putting your company in jeopardy. So typically you count the founders, you divide it into 100, and that's the fair percentage. If you founded, how many of you founded your companies? And generally speaking, how did you divide the founders pie?
So I actually was only one, so I didn't have to go with this.
So,
Yeah.
okay, well, that's not a bad starting point, as long as you can get the other people to join you later on. But that is important. I'll talk about some of the dynamics later. But so that's conventional wisdom, and it could be wrong, and it could be fatal. So you've got two founders. One jumps into the company full steam ahead, abandons the prior job, abandons compensation, and puts everything into the company, while the other one, the other co-founder, keeps the job and promises to work on nights and weekends. That inherently does not work out very well. Think about 9 months down the road, a person has worked without income for 9 months, has been working 65 to 80-hour weeks, at least 6 days a week, and the other person has been going to his job 5 days a week, 8 hours a day, and then perhaps as the spirit moves that person, they may drop by in the evening to see what's going on, or they may see if they can do something over the weekend. But in a situation where that person has a family, for example, the startup takes a backseat to family activities under those circumstances. And so within 9 months, you've got a situation that is unfair. There is somebody who is suffering pain, somebody who's not, and trying to convince the other founder that this isn't fair. It proves to be an emotionally driven discussion and not a very good one on an outcome. You're doing well. You started the business and you're making $250,000 a year based upon the performance of the business. And one of the founders says, well, we really ought to take 100,000 and leave 150,000 in the company to help it grow, because we've got such a good opportunity here to change the world. That's what we should do. The other founder says, look, I've worked really hard over these past 18 months, and we've built a profitable company. And as far as I'm concerned, I want the current income. I don't want to change the world. I want to live a comfortable life. How do you deal with that? This is what certainly there are dynamics around money. I'm not sure I'd put that in the founder's pie pot. Normally what I try to do is any capital contributions for founders are treated as convertible notes in most cases, so that they're available to become stock in the future, depending on how things work. But don't dilute the other founder just because there's an availability of capital. So I sort of look at dollars one way, I look at equity another way, and sort of divide the two. But what if you got 3 founders, 4 founders, 6 founders, 20 founders? I mean, there have been instances where I've worked with university spinouts where an entire department is part of the founder's pie. That doesn't work out very well. And so, and one of the other things, I guess I didn't say it here, maybe I will later, but the founder's pie is intended to provide compensation to those individuals who have helped the effort get to this point, pre-incorporation and all of that, but have really contributed to making things happen so that you're moving ahead with this company. And so people should get rewarded for their contributions. And then the challenge is the primary role of the founder's stock is to incent future performance. Okay, you've joined the company. We've given you, 15% of your stock outright, but what we want to do is withhold 85% that'll vest. Trying to forecast what somebody's going to contribute in the future is extremely difficult. And in most cases, you end up in a situation that what was anticipated doesn't come to fruition. And again, you have schisms among the founders with regard to why aren't we there? You were supposed to do this. You were supposed to do this. I did this up above and beyond you all. And so again, you got a situation where the founders will be, if not at war with one another, there's going to be significant tension among them. And tension among founders ripples through an organization so quickly. It is so obvious. It is so uninspiring to the people who have joined the company. I joined the company because you shared a vision of where we were going and all of that. And now we're not getting there because you people are pissing around about who deserves what. Let's get our eye back on the ball. So, yeah, let's take a look. If you've got a startup, you have an idea, you have how that idea might turn into a business, the business model. You've been involved in certain activities that relate specifically to the company, perhaps, and also relate to your personal network. There are going to be people that make a commitment, the people that join the company, the people that forego income. And then there's also the question of responsibility. Who has to do the important things? So we take a situation, the founder one's inventor, tenured professor, a luminary with an international reputation. Founder two is an MBA student that's been recruited out of the Swartz Center to get involved. That person is going to be the business person Founder 3 is the postdoc who actually knows how to make the technology work. And founder 4 is a lab tech who just sort of happened to be in the right place at the right time. So you're looking for 4 founders. So let's take a look at how we might evaluate that. First is, how important are each of those 5 elements on a scale of 0 to 10 or 1 to 10? And it basically says, okay, the technology, the idea is very, very important. That's really what we're basing the company on. And having people that are in harness and taking responsibility for moving the company forward and taking it from an idea and aspirations into a real organization, recognizing fundraising needs and all of that, those are important as well. So now we look at founder 1. The founder 1 has gets a 10 on the idea. It's her technology. And the other areas are brought in. The founder 2 is the business person. Contributions are different along the lines. Founder 3, understanding the domain. And founder 4, not being all that important, but there. And I'm not sure what I did with. Okay, so what we've done, I think okay. So the guy with the tech person, all they're contributing is the fact that they work with the technology in a lab. So now let's take those, apply the weight for each, and now we fill out a matrix where you've basically got weighted values based upon each cell. You take that, you add it up, the total number of points that have been distributed is 321, and the percent of that 321 that each of the founders are aligned with are included here. So you've got 33%, 44%, 16, 6. And those help provide direction and guidance. Those are not the numbers that should be used. This exercise is not deterministic. It's let's talk about the various topics. As you look at this, each cell on this matrix can be a topic of discussion. The founder, the tech founder 1, that founder is going to say, look, it's my technology. There is no company if my technology is not in the business. So I deserve 50% of the company at least. And if it's the first time that faculty member has gotten involved in commercialization, that may be something that is so ingrained with that person that getting past that is essential. And you as a co-founder want to have that discussion early, not late. So you go through this process. That gives some guidance. Doesn't look like the business person who is going to commit to the company and also take responsibility for fundraising and doing all those kind of things. Does it make sense that person deserves a larger bite of the pie than others? Similarly, the technologist comes up in second place. You can see how they drop off. So those getting discussion around the relative value that came out of this exercise, does that make sense to each of you founders? So one of the things that people often ask is, okay, I didn't have the benefit, yeah.
Just wondering, you mentioned that it's good to have those conversations early rather than late. Specifically, like how early do you think is a good time to have those conversations?
One more time, my hearing is a little bit.
Oh, sorry, yeah, no, I'm just wondering when is the best time to have those conversations about splitting up the founder pie?
Before you found the company. As you're on the verge of creating the company, go through this exercise. This exercise will purpose so many things that aren't obvious. So many things that pop up because it isn't fair. Starting with the premise that it's fair screws everything up and isn't very intelligent. And I don't mean that in a negative sense. It's just a statement of fact. Yeah.
Two-part question. Who assigns the weights? Who assigns the weights? And then what if you need 3 founders? Meaning like you need a technical founder, business, but you only have 2 for now.
Okay. Who is the founder and who isn't? That's sort of the question.
Yes, yeah. Then who assigns the weights?
That's a good question. And how is it decided? One way that it's decided, and it's not exactly the way I propose doing it, but some people have. Each of the founders are given the matrix and some descriptions of what it is, what's the exercise. And so each individual goes through the step of valuing the components, taking a look at the co-founders, giving them values along each of those dynamics, run it up and create that. Then either you all come to a meeting to have a discussion of how you reconcile the differences between what has been proposed by each of the individuals and what is proper, could be an interesting discussion. The other way, and I prefer it, is that the founders get together, maybe some beer and pizza, and walk through each step. The idea is worth 10 points on the scale, because the idea is a binary: yes, you got a company, or no, you don't. Business model, we're so far away from actually being revenue generating. Business model really isn't relevant. So that person doesn't deserve credit on the business model or its relative value. There you go. So you go through and everybody will have a different view of these. So you go back and forth. Why this? This is also the time where the professor is going to say 7 is inadequate. Should be a 10. This is a time where the business model should be 0. So since we're so far away from revenues, and nobody held a gun to your head to jump into the company. So it was nice of you to contribute your time in absence of income, but we didn't hold a gun to your head. We didn't make it a condition of you joining the company. Maybe you did, maybe you didn't. And so you go through the process, and just doing that exercise will flesh out a lot of biases that are being brought to the table, a lot of conventional wisdom that is brought to the table, and without a doubt, a lot of disagreements about what each of those values should be and how they compare to the other factors. Then the fun begins in that you take a look at each of the founders and how much is each founder contributing on each of those points. And again, most of the time, the individual will believe that he or she deserves more than what's being offered. Human nature, it's just going to happen. And so that again brings up conversations that will bring to the surface assumptive sense that each of the founders have brought to the table, but without you collectively understanding what each of you are thinking about, they don't surface. Using this as sort of a dynamic agenda where each cell is a discussion point, you can go through this process and you'll find out a lot of things that weren't obvious, that when you just looked at dividing by the number of founders as being fair, weren't necessary. But if you don't get this right at the beginning, then you could be in great difficulty. Yeah.
Do you have any tips for making sure that in this process, nobody takes it personally and you don't undermine like the synergy of the founding group?
No. I mean, the thing is that this is very personal, whether it is explicit or not. All of this whole activity comes into self-image. Who am I, and who am I relative to this company? And am I God's gift to making this company happy? So it's ideal that you do it objectively, as I'm discussing here. The reality, and really what you want, is discuss it from a belief perspective of each of the individuals to prompt those discussions. And the outcome of those discussions in some cases is going to be, yeah, life's too short and this is going to be a disaster, because we're all bringing certain things into play that are incompatible. And so joining the company now, knowing that there's a disaster likely to occur in 9 months, I can make better use of my 9 months than doing that. So, and otherwise it gives you a chance to look at relative values and do all of that. So this could be a very long meeting. It could be prepared for it to be very emotional once you get past the initial veneer, and driving to a consensus among the founders. If you could achieve that, if you could understand it, and if you could accept it, then you've got the foundation of a founder pie distribution, but it also sets the stage for the roles of each of the individuals with the company. Because the founder's pie, again, is what have you done to date, and what are you going to do in the future? And so by going through this exercise, you will have debated what that role is moving into the future. Okay?
Makes sense.
So we go through all of this. We end up with these numbers, those percentages. It's a convenient way of quantifying these activities. But like I said, it's not deterministic. It is used for, absolute value consideration or assessment, and also relative value. And so everybody will have opinions on whether that outcome is good or bad. What if you get it wrong? Well, one of the things that happens, particularly if you raise outside capital, and you probably ought to do even as a founder, is founder shares need to be subject to buyback, because a significant portion of the shares, again, are for future contributions. And if one of the founders leaves, how do you deal with that? Well, you deal with it by having this buyback feature so that they only get those shares that have vested. And I'll sort of talk about vesting later, but it basically says, I earned them over a period of time, over a 4-year period, typically with a vesting of a amount on a monthly basis. So if you have that, if you don't address it as founders, you are putting yourself at risk. If before you are able to go out and raise the next round, that situation occurs, you don't really have a mechanism without the buyback to control the founders. I can tell you with great pain, when I first started in this business, my mindset, which was also probably the founder's mindset, was, look, I've busted my ass to get here. I've earned the founder's position. And if I were to leave, that's my right. Out the door. 2 founders. They originally had the company divided 45, 45, and 10 set aside. One founder left, said, I'm working too hard. This is too hard. I got to go live with my parents in Las Vegas, literally in that case. So, but my thought was, well, gee, they own those shares by virtue of getting to where we are. And now we're telling them you don't really own those shares. I had challenges getting my head around that concept. But once I got over it, and once I got burned a few times, it became obvious to me why you would do that. There is a very rare, but if your co-founders are objective, like you would have liked them to be originally, maybe we should do the founder pie exercise again, just so we can assess where are we relative to where we thought we'd be. And does that exercise then promote some additional thinking that might be useful to rebalance the equity based upon this 9 months of experience or whatever, in order for each of the contributors to get compensation closer to what their contributions have been. That's rare. You need very open individuals to think that way. One of the things you do is if you haven't got the pay back, you can basically barter. You're going to leave the company, or we're going to ask you to leave. It's going to be without cause, but once you leave the company, all your benefits go away. And so how about we buy your shares back at cost, de minimis, virtually nothing, but we will extend your healthcare benefits for a year. We will put you on a retainer of $10,000 a month for a year. And so we'll barter what that person has and what it is that you can provide that might enable you to resolve that type of a difficulty. Facilitate a new round with new investors. I forget which. Okay. So since we're talking about startups, founders pie, we're talking about the fact that you're going to have to raise additional money, or almost obviously. And so when those investors come on board, they're professionals at this type of stuff. So they can take a look at where we are and presumably take remedial action to rebalance things in a fairer way. You can threaten to leave, but you better be prepared to leave. And again, if the environment turns sickly, turns extremely bad, there's a word I'm missing, but yeah, life's too short. By virtue of what you've done up to this point in time, you've gone from an entrepreneurial wannabe, from the outside, did the business plan, did all this kind of stuff. It's actually being an entrepreneur. And you've also lived with some of the downsides or some of the issues that are important to take advantage of. So say adios and go do it again with a different group of people and go forward. You don't want to stay in a hostile environment for 2 years and find yourself flat out miserable and broke because the company hasn't been able to raise the funding. Do not do this. Do not depend upon investors to come in and clean up your equity. If you allow them to do that, they will apply their assessments to you. And if there are needs for adjustment, they will basically invoke them. And they will invoke them largely by providing each of the founders or some of the founders stock options to enhance their position above to a closer level of what they ought to have in the company as compared to what they currently have in the company. And on a relative basis, what this person is the leader, and going through all that. The investors don't have any of your history. The investors will make assessments of each of you and where the company is and what the roles are, and they will make judgments, and then they will impose those judgments on you. You don't want to put yourself in that circumstance. Over. So once we've done the founder's pie, one of the things that you keep in mind as you're thinking about equity compensation is that when the day is done, when the company has gotten to a liquidity event, it's gone public, it's been acquired, at the time of that event, it's not unusual for the founders and management to own somewhere between 1/5 and 1/3 of the company. You have several rounds of investment and all of that. And so when you think about that, that means that if you each had 25%, which I hope you don't, it means that at the time of this exit, you're probably going to be down to 3% each as a result of the arithmetic involved of adding additional shares to investors and replenishing the stock option pool. In terms of stock options, the stock option pool is typically going to be somewhere in the range of 10 to 25% of the shares of the company at that particular moment in time. And that's a pool that's going to be used to attract people to join the company. And so you've got a range here, depending upon what the company needs and what it's already got, to figure out what those numbers should be. So what's a stock option? The stock option is not stock. Stock option is the right to buy a share of stock in the future at a price that is established today for some length of time, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. So you are granted 50,000 shares, and it's got an exercise price of $1. That's based upon the most recent round of financing, and so you've used that per share price as the proxy for your share price. In 5 years, the company gets acquired for $10 a share. And you get the opportunity of almost simultaneously buying 50,000 shares for $50,000, selling it immediately for $500,000, and capture $450,000 of freed cash to you, except for taxes. So that's how this works. You get a share of stock today. You join the company because you think it's going to be very successful, and whatever its share price today is going to be inconsequential when the company goes public or sells, and therefore this is the exercise that you would go through if you were trying to entice somebody to join you, or if you were being enticed to join. You know, the question, how many is enough? It depends on how many shares there are. So all these calculations are done on a fully diluted basis. And fully diluted means all the common shares that the existing agreements enable to be established at the time of the transaction. So like I said, the stock options are going to vest over time, but the stock options represent the right to buy a share of stock. So all the stock options are going to be included in a fully diluted basis. You may have bartered some equity with service providers early on. Those get included. If you've got a convertible note and it's going to convert, those shares will be included. So a fully diluted basis is a lot of shares. Some to many are not actually outstanding, but are future rights. So you do that, and you know, gee, if I'm offered 5,000 options and we only have 10 outstanding, I got 50%. If there are 1 million outstanding, I have a 0.5%. So it all depends on the fully diluted number of shares. And you need to know that so you can put an offering content in context, or put the offer to you in context. And if you're being recruited, it's absolutely essential for you to ask, what's the fully diluted share base of the company? You're offering me X number of options. For me to evaluate that, I need to know, how do those shares relate to the total capitalization of the company? It's the only way I can do it. Vesting. Now you see it, now you don't. Okay. Even when you're granted the options, you don't own the options. You're getting sort of a theme here. And so what happens is you earn those options over time. And its purpose is, I issue the options now, and by virtue of the vesting period, I sort of tether you to the company, because if you leave, you will be abandoning some number of options that you were originally granted by not being there through the full vesting cycle. Typical setup would be 4-year vesting. And that would be 25% of the options cliff vest on the first anniversary, and then 136 per month are granted or move into ownership. So at the end of 4 years, you would own all of the options. But if you leave on the 364th day of your first year, you may walk out with nothing because you don't get them. And so in essence, a somewhat cynical way of looking at that is, anybody you bring on and use stock options, the employee, the people you're asking to join, is really on a probationary job for the first year. You have the ability to release somebody if they're not doing their job, personalities don't click, whatever the reasons are. And if that happens within the first year, you have no obligation to provide stock options. Now, you may do that because even though this person is leaving, they have made important contributions. And we understand why they're leaving. And that's, I mean, it hurts us as a company, but you know, we've been in this boat together. We understand one another in many respects. I understand why you're leaving, and so we'll allow you to vest more than what the formula says. Cliff is a lump sum on the first anniversary. And if you have not fully vested your options, they will roll over and continue vesting at the successor company if you're acquired. So now you're going to hear one of the things that you'll hear perhaps is, as an entrepreneur, you're going to have to raise funding in the future. And by virtue of raising that money, at least one thing is going to happen. Each round of investment puts new shares into the company's balance sheet. And so going that way, there are going to be more shares added. So your percent of the company is going to fall down. Your 100% is going to be less than 100%, less than that. But if the share price is going up, the value of your options is going up as well. And that's what you want to achieve. So you can see here, if you went through 3 rounds of funding and then an IPO, in this particular case, you'll see that when the day is done, the founder owns not quite 6% of the company, but that 6% is worth almost $11 million. And so at T equals 0, you need to go through the process of looking up at the sky and rosy and what it is we want this company to achieve. Is it possible? Is this an outcome that's reasonable? And is that a check that I'd be very happy to cash? So depending upon your expectations when you join the company, that's either good or it's not good. If it's not good, then you have to roll things back and figure out, okay, I don't like that outcome. What do we need to change in order for the outcome to be more acceptable? Generally speaking, once you're up and running, over time, you're going to find the need to add key people to the company, usually at the C level. And so if you have to go out and recruit a CEO who's a rainmaker, the CEO is typically somebody who's taken 1 or more companies public, has raised money for those companies, or they've been acquired, and can do all those things that CEOs do to make things happen. And that person would come on board at 8 to 12%. That's when, you know, a typical situation is technology founder, he's the CEO, she's the CEO. And that person doesn't want to, has found out that they don't want to be the business person anymore. They recognize the problems. In similar case, if you've got a technical founder who wants to be CEO for self-image reasons or whatever, then you can bring in a COO. This is somebody to run the business. President type, general manager type. And they come in and they basically take all of the business functions away from the CEO. Of the major positions that are going to report, there are probably two that are going to be most important to the company. In my experience, I often look at a VP of engineering as being one of my first critical hires, particularly with spit outs, because university technologists don't understand budgets, don't understand timetables, and don't want to march to that drum. But you need some subset of those people driving toward a commercial product that can be sold. So the VP of engineering comes on board recognizing that R&D will do the propeller hat kind of stuff, and a group of individuals will be doing the product engineering, creating a budget and a timetable, and creating a company that can go out there. I say 2 to 3.5%. The other people, and unless your company has finance as a critical element of it, a CFO with a CPA probably is more than enough, and there are a lot of them out there, so they don't come in quite the same. In terms of bringing directors on board, 0.5 to 1%, advisors 0.25 to 0.5%. Directors have legal liability. Advisors don't. And that's part of the reason why the director's compensation. Founder vesting, I've often done it this way, which is similar to what you've heard, but I honor vesting at time equals 0. So 25% of the shares are yours outright, and the remaining 75% happen over time. There are circumstances under which the vesting periods will be
Founder investing, how do you also feel about clawbacks for founders specifically? So in private companies, clawbacks are really common for if you're an employee, but I haven't really heard about them with founders. Are you familiar with that? How do you feel about that?
What I'm describing is essentially a callback.
Okay.
It says that the share exists. Therefore, the mechanism has to be one that allows the company to extract their share based upon them.
Right.
And so that's what it's describing here is, okay, you can have your shares, you own 25% outright, the remaining 75% or something for you to.
Okay.
And then that expires, things monthly basis.
Okay, but after the 4 years, if the company is still private,
Yeah.
and say they leave, would it be reasonable to also have a clawback with that? So they leave, let's say we don't want them to own 30% of the company outright, if they're not with the company. Is it reasonable to have a clawback in there and say we'll buy that back from you? Okay.
If you stack the deck so much in the company's favor, it makes the equity so fragile.
Yeah.
It loses its appeal and power. So it's one of those things. Yeah, sometimes people sell on a secondary market because they're going to get some cash out. That's not unusual. So sometimes there is acceleration. The situation here is the company gets acquired. It provides a liquidity event and money flows to the investors. And the CEO says, look, my job, build a company, achieve liquidity, return to you your investment returns. And I should be released from any future involvement, or more likely, I should, my involvement should be a year or so to support the transition. And so half of what's unvested becomes vested at that closing, et cetera. Don't want to bore you. You could sit down with spreadsheets and play around with these things. Make sure you have experienced professionals. Make sure that you've created a network. And whoops, don't do anything without professional assistance. Bingo. I'll stick around for a while, but this is not a time to be cheap on your professional partnerships. You don't want a real estate attorney doing this deal for you. This is something that if it's done wrong now, it may only surface after 24 or 36 months, but that could put a company in extreme distress. What used to be a common set of circumstances was when you started the company before it formed, you had a bunch of friends, they liked what you were doing, or maybe you worked on a class project and you're going to take the class project, roll that accomplishment into the company and move forward. And then you start the company and move forward. Well, the thing is, technology development, like software, is a work product and it's owned by the creator of the software unless otherwise encumbered. So if you have a friend that's helping you go along, you need to get a release from that person for that software. Otherwise, when you're about to go public and the SEC is looking through everything and says, hey, there's this pot of stock out here. Where'd that come from? Whose is that? And that can cause, if nothing else, digestive problems. Okay. I hope I've been helpful in some way, and we can call it a night and day or whatever. And any of you who have questions, feel free to shoot them at me.